we just talked about the coaching staff and how young and inexperienced it is. Then you want to throw that on top of them. I mean, you're almost trying to fail.
You're listening to the JAKIB Media Sports Network in partnership with AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio. Subscribe to the JAKIB Media channel on YouTube for access to all daily sports content.
All right, welcome back. The Fix is live on a Thursday, 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. inside the Prop Swap studios of AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio. And another day, I was going to say day, whatever it is, of Carson Wentz gate. And John McMullen and I have been talking about it every damn night at 7:30. Follow John on Twitter at JFMcMullen, PhillyVoice.com, SI.com, and host of Extending the Play every Saturday, 10 a.m. to 11 right here on AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio. John, how we doing tonight?
Doing well, Ryan. Holding up a little bit better than you. You seem frustrated with Carson Wentz gate. We can talk about the coaches today. They announced the coaching staff finally.
Yeah, let's talk coaches, man, because I'm a little bit worn down from Carson Wentz. He's gotten to me.
He's gotten to a lot of people, evidently. It seems triangular. It's a triangular firing squad. Howie hates Doug hates Howie hates Carson, blah, blah, blah. Everybody hates everybody as the world turns.
That's Philadelphia in a nutshell, my friend. All right, so let's you take the wheel here. Where do you want to start with the coaches?
23 deep, which is actually, I always see those numbers and I think, wow, that's where we are, 23 coaches for an NFL team, but the Eagles are actually on the low end of that spectrum. I think Urban Meyer announced his first Jacksonville coaching spot today. I think he's at 28 or 29. So that's the way the NFL is going. Soon we're going to get one-to-one player ratios, like coach to students. Back when I was young, they threw us all in the classroom and poor one teacher had to deal with us all. Now it's about getting it down to as few pupils for each coach as possible, and we'll see how it works out. I've talked a lot about the lack of experience on this staff. I think that's a legitimate concern. I mean, most of the names we already knew and we've been talking about for a while, and it starts with coordinator Shane Steichen. Is 35. Jonathan Gann is 37. Michael Clay is 29, the special teams coordinator. He's the youngest coordinator in the NFL as of right now. So it's a very young group. They added Alex Tanney, who retired 2 days ago, sort of like a mini Josh McCown. Hasn't been playing as long, obviously, as Josh, but backup quarterback for a number of teams, called it quits 2 days ago, and boom, he's a quality control coach on the Eagles. So, and he's still older than Nick Rallis, who's the linebackers coach. He's 27. He's the youngest of them. He's the baby of the lot.
We've talked about the youth on this coaching staff a lot, John, over the past month or so, however long it's been. And you've brought up, maybe Howie and Lurie bring in a consultant or, someone in not a made-up role, but an added role with some experience who's a little bit older, both literally and just, on the sideline age-wise. Do you still think that's a possibility?
You never know, because you can do these things pretty much at any time. I mean, who knows? We could be in the spring, even though I don't think there's going to be OTAs again this year because of COVID. But they could, get together and surmise, wow, this is, for a lack of a better term, not working, and maybe we need somebody with some experience. And there's always somebody like that on the streets. You saw it last year with Marty Morningweg. That was later, bringing him in when the Eagles probably couldn't get what they wanted at offensive coordinator, and all of a sudden they bring him back. You see this kind of stuff happen all the time. So you can do that at any point. And I've said, to me, it's not really about anything more than being a sounding board. I would have liked to have had a former head coach, and even if it was just in a consultant role, just to be there if Nick Sirianni had any questions about. I always talk about this job. People focus on the football stuff, and that's the easy part. It's a much bigger job than that. And that's what every single head coach I've ever talked to, when I ask them, what's different, what didn't you expect, they all say, don't get much time to work on football because you got so much other stuff to do. And he's going to find that out pretty quickly.
You've talked about Dave Phipp in the past, and just how, I don't know, underappreciated he may have been, whether that's to the fans or the average person or to the franchise. And yeah, he's the special teams coordinator, so that comes with the territory a little bit. Michael Clay, you mentioned the youth, and he seems like he's going to do a nice job with the team, and I have nothing really to back that. I want you to back it, but just your thoughts on Michael Clay, and he seems like a potential head coach down the road.
Well, I think a lot of people look at special teams coordinators now as being more viable as head coaches. I think two things. One, John Harbaugh kind of changed that thought process, his success. But really, people talk about it more now, but they rarely pull the trigger, probably because they're afraid to go against the grain. I mean, that's the reality. But the thought, and you've seen it over the NFL a number of years when people need interim coaches, the most recent being Cleveland, when Kevin Stefanski was down and tested positive for COVID. They went with the special teams coordinator, Mike Prefer. Why? Because that's the only other coach on a coaching staff that deals with the entire team. You think about it. The offensive coordinator doesn't do anything with the defense. The defensive coordinator doesn't do anything with the offense. The only one who gets to address the entire team besides the head coach is the special teams coordinator. So a lot of organizations talk lip service about special teams guys, and Dave has been one of those names. I mentioned Mike Prefer. He did the same thing in Minnesota when Mike Zimmer had eye surgery. They needed a coach. He couldn't coach. Mike Prefer is who they chose. Jim Fossil, when the Rams needed an interim coach, he got the call. So that's the way a lot of people think. But then when it comes to hiring somebody, they don't pull the trigger. I know Keith Armstrong has gotten a lot of interviews over the years, but it surprises me that more guys haven't gotten an opportunity because of John Harbaugh's success. And he was here, obviously, as Andy Reid's long-time special teams coordinator. But even that, people kind of forget. His last year, he was shifted over to secondary coach. And it's almost like he needed that extra tag to get a chance and an opportunity. It's weird. These habits you're swimming upstream when you're trying to break them.
All right, so I ask you about special teams with Clay. Let's go to the defense. And you have an article up on SI.com talking about something on the defense in particular, something the fans have talked a lot about on Twitter. With the new D coordinator in Gannon coming, Jim Schwartz departing, the linebacker position, that's a popular topic of discussion on the defense. You discussed in your article, will we see a change in philosophy with the change in D.C.?
Yeah, you would think so, almost. Well, almost for two reasons. Because, one, you have to. I mean, you have to value that position more than the Eagles have, almost by mistake. And honestly, if you think about last year already, and you think about the draft, the Eagles did draft the linebacker in the third round, which is a premium pick. Now, he's very raw player in Davion Taylor. They drafted a linebacker in the 6th round, which you don't expect as much out of. But they're trying to get more athletic. They're trying to get better. You know, you just saw Tampa Bay win the Super Bowl, and besides Tom Brady, and obviously that's going to get all the notice and all the press and media. But, I mean, the best player on that team during the entire run was Devin White, who's a linebacker. And, you know, he was the 5th pick in the draft. So while as a whole, I agree with the Eagles' sentiment over the years that the position has been devalued, I don't think there's any question. You can't really argue against that. Most teams still understand they need 2 linebackers, and they need 2 good linebackers at the bare minimum. And look, if you're a difference-making player, you're a difference-making player. It doesn't matter if you play linebacker, safety, running back, quarterback. Obviously, quarterback is more important, but you can put the imprint on a game from any position still. And a guy like Devin White proves that. And then you look at Nick Rollis, who's the linebackers coach now. And where does he come from? He comes from Minnesota. Well, the Vikings, you know, before this year, they had a top 5 defense. That's 4 years in a row before injuries and opt-outs and attrition just killed them this year. And one of those injuries, 2 of those injuries, were Anthony Barr and Eric Kendricks, 2 of the best linebackers in football. And Barr was, I think, I don't know, somewhere 9, 10, 11, somewhere in that range. I don't know exactly, but he was a high draft choice. And Eric Kendricks was a 2nd rounder, a little bit undersized, but developed into a great linebacker. Point is, they've, you know, invested in the position. At some point, the Eagles got to do a little bit more. And if you think about, and I say Nick Rollis, Jonathan Gannon also comes from Minnesota. Before he was in Indianapolis, he was under Mike Zimmer in Minnesota, who values the position. So you would think the Eagles are going to put more emphasis on the linebacker position. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to take Micah Parsons at number 6 overall. I don't think they're going to do that. But they're going to try to upgrade this position. It's been a long time before we could actually say that and have some conviction about it.
Why has there been a devalue overall for the linebacker position? And I'll give you my answer, and we've talked about this. It's because of how the offensive, you know, schemes and how they've evolved. So, you know, you don't have the traditional middle linebacker, whether it's, you know, from Brian Urlacher to Ray Lewis, and then you can even go further back in the game. The game's different now, but because of that old way of thinking, how I look at it is teams, and the Eagles are the prime example, they haven't figured out how to use the linebacker in today's game. Like, just because it's different doesn't mean it's less important, and maybe they learned that the hard way.
No, yeah, I agree with both your points. I mean, it's less valuable because linebackers don't play as much. I mean, we always say the 4-3 base. Well, the 4-3 base isn't your base defense anymore. Your base defense is nickel, where there's only 2 linebackers on the field. And really, if you add in all the sub packages, there's only 1 linebacker that plays all 3 downs, generally for every NFL team. Now, if you have better ones like I just mentioned, you have Barr and Kendricks in Minnesota when they're healthy, and when you have, I mentioned Devin White, Levante David in Tampa. You know, those guys are so good, you keep them on the field no matter what, because they can do different things, and they can excel in pass coverage as much as whether it's stopping the run or blitzing the quarterback in all 3 phases. So, yeah, the traditional middle linebacker, the Dick Butkus, those guys aren't needed any longer for a number of reasons. One, you can't be as physical. Intimidation has basically been taken out of the game. So what's the use? You're just going to get, 15-yard flags. And then the second part is obviously, what Jim Schwartz always said, and is correct, defense is a reactionary thing by nature. You have to react to what the offense is doing. And the offense has 3, 4, 5 receivers, 5 guys split out, empty backfields. You got to have guys who can cover. So it's difficult to find guys who can do both. There's a lot, interestingly, there's probably a lot more athletes in Davion Taylor because of the way football is being played at the college level. He's a perfect example of that. That guy can run with anybody. But, he's so raw. He doesn't know what he's doing as far as run support. And then all of a sudden you get into a game where you're facing Derrick Henry or somebody like that, and you got linebackers who can't play run support. So it's difficult to find guys like Devin White. That's why I say, people say you can't take a linebacker at 5. Well, Tampa Bay did, and they won the Super Bowl in large part because they took a linebacker at 5. Problem is, you got to be honest with yourself, as everything in evaluation. And I bring up Parsons, who's probably the best linebacker in this draft. He's not Devin White. So I do think it's not worth taking a guy like that at 6. But if it were a Devin White year, yeah. Best player, take the best player. I don't care about valuation of position. I don't want the 4th best quarterback over what I just saw Devin White do over an entire postseason run. Because if you're getting the 4th best quarterback, that's probably a guy who's maybe the 30th best player. But people are so quarterback desperate, they reach for him.
You say all the time, and a lot of people do, and I completely agree with this. You take the best player if you're at a certain position for the NFL draft. But isn't that easier said than done for a lot of teams, John?
Yeah, it's always easier said than done because need is, and I always go back to Brian Belichick, the first one who told me. It's a quote that goes way back before him, but he said need is the worst talent evaluator in sports. It clouds your thinking. It makes things foggy. And the most obvious position is quarterback. So we look at this year's draft, and you're supposed to have 4 quarterbacks and might go in the top 10. Well, let's be honest. Trevor Lawrence is one of those prospects that, any year he's going to be the number 1 pick in the draft. You go back to the Jameis Winston draft, that's not a Trevor Lawrence draft. The Jared Goff, Carson Wentz draft, that's not a Trevor Lawrence draft. The Andrew Luck draft, that's a Trevor Lawrence draft. That's the kind of prospect he is. So no issues with him. Then you start talking about Zach Wilson and Justin Fields and Trey Lance. Well, Zach Wilson is probably going to go number 2. He's not the 2nd best player in this draft. No way. And wherever Fields go, and ultimately I think somebody's going to trade up to get him. So he's probably going to go 3 or 4. He's not the 3rd or 4th best player in this draft. And similar with Trey Lance, it's you watch how it falls. And we're still really early in the process. There's a guy who can go, in my opinion, either direction depending on evaluation. But if quarterback desperate teams start seeing quarterbacks drop off the board, he's going to get pushed up the board farther than he should. And I look at some of the most dominant players over recent years, and I keep mentioning them, 3rd time, Devin White's one of them. The linchpin I always talk about that put San Francisco in the Super Bowl was Bosa, again, a defensive and edge rusher. Nick Bosa was sort of the final piece of the puzzle to that defensive front, turning them into a terror. And all of a sudden, San Francisco is riding a running game and a defense into the Super Bowl. There are other ways. Don't get me wrong. If you find a great quarterback, that's obviously the easiest way to success in this league. No question about it. But there are other ways to do it. And when you have a player like Nick Bosa or you have a player like Devin White, just take them.
Like you said here, we're a ways away from, the NFL draft, just deep dives and discussions, and we still have some time just calendar-wise. But who do you project to be the best player available when the Eagles are on the clock at number 6?
Well, I think they'll be helped by the fact that the quarterbacks will be pushed up the board. And ultimately, I think all three of those guys are going to be in the top 5 of this draft. So right there, you're sitting at number 6. That means 3 quarterbacks are gone, and you're looking at every other position. You're going to get a good player. And I think the best player would be Jamar Chase, and you're hopeful that he falls to number 6. I don't know if that's possible. I don't think there's any question Devontae Smith is going to be there. So, that's a tough evaluation because he does have a lack of size that you have to be concerned about. But guess what? I mean, not his second run here, but his first run, Deshaun Jackson's first run was pretty good. And nobody was worried about his size as he became, one of the best home run hitters in NFL history. Maybe go in that direction. I think the Eagles have too much depth at left tackle, but we'll see. I mean, Lane Johnson, you have to be concerned about his injury history, and who knows? If you're in a transition phase, the Eagles might look to move on from expensive players. I don't think they're going to give up on Andre Dillard. Jordan Mailata's here, Jack Driscoll. So they have a lot of bodies there. I'm not sure they would go offensive tackle with Sewell, but, there's another player that could be in play there. And then you have, I think, both cornerbacks are going to be there for the Eagles, the 2 top corners in the draft. And obviously they need help at that position opposite Darius Slay. So I always, the Eagles are in a good position in this draft for 2 reasons. One, they're really high up, so it's going to be easier to pick a really good player. And second, again, you can throw the dart at the dartboard and you're going to find a need. So you can pretty much take whoever you think the best player is, and that's going to be a need on this football team more likely than not.
And I asked you that question because, all right, let's say Smith is there, and that is hypothetically the best player available, and the Eagles don't take him. Well, then why didn't they take him? Then you have to look at that and say their philosophy isn't taking the best available. So why not go linebacker, or why not go, whatever other direction, offensive line, offensive tackle. So you've just detailed a lot of this, but if they don't go Devontae Smith, and just to play along, he is the best available, what position should they look at for number 6?
Well, the most obvious, if the Carson Wentz trade goes through, and we all think it's going to, even though things have slowed down dramatically, I can't imagine they would bring him back for a multitude of reasons. He doesn't want to be here. They don't want him here. I don't think you would want to put a quarterback controversy on a rookie head coach. We just talked about the coaching staff and how young and inexperienced it is. Then you want to throw that on top of them. You're almost trying to fail. So ultimately, I think he gets traded. And I always go back to 2016 when the Eagles took Carson Wentz and Howie Roseman traded up twice to get up to number 2. And one of the things he said was, we don't plan on being here this high in the draft very often. Turns out they got not that high, but they're high in the draft far earlier than they would have hoped or expected. And he said, when you're up here, you better take advantage of it and get the quarterback. So if they are up at number 6, and they are up at number 6, and one of those quarterbacks falls, and it would most likely be at Fields, you got to think long and hard. If Carson Wentz isn't here and he's not going to be here, you're just going to say Jalen Hurts is my future quarterback. If you do your evaluation, and remember, Ryan, the pro days, there's no combine. The pro days are very limited. Trevor Lawrence is having his pro day coming up, and there's only 7 teams allowed in. Now, nobody has a chance at Trevor Lawrence. Obviously, only one team has a chance, but you go through the motions. Only 7 teams are allowed in. The Eagles are one of them. Why is that important? It's not important for any other reason that it's clear they're going to be doing their due diligence at the quarterback position. And that means Zach Wilson, and that means Justin Fields, and that means Trey Lance. So if they do their evaluation and they think, and I use Fields because he would be the most likely to fit into that category and the most likely to be available, if they think he's going to be a superstar player, you take the quarterback.
Man, I'm envisioning Carson Wentz, Jalen Hurts, and potentially your top draft pick, who's a quarterback, walking into camp. I know.
For some reason, they kept Carson Wentz, which again I don't think is going to happen. They would not take a quarterback. And by the way, I mean, and what I just said about need and you should take the best player available. The Eagles, every team in this league has made a mistake of reaching for a need at some point. Every single team. That's just the pressure is so great. And if you're weighing a couple players and say, well, this guy's probably a little bit better, but we don't need a quarterback. We don't need a defensive end or whatever position it might be. So we're going to take the lesser player, the slightly lesser player, because it's a position of need. The Eagles are like every other team in the NFL. They've done that at certain points, and everybody typically grows to regret it.
Last one here for you, John. And while we're on the topic of the draft here tonight, now what makes Bill Belichick historically so brilliant at evaluating talent and finding talent that others can't seem to find? And have people tried to duplicate that? And if not, or if so, why haven't more tried to duplicate what he does? Because it just seems like he has no pressure. He knows what he wants. He knows where to find it, and he's able to deliver.
Well, I think Bill's I always compare Bill Belichick and Andy Reid for obvious reasons. I think a lot of people do. The two best coaches of this generation. Bill's obviously number one, Andy's number two. But Andy has a better coaching tree, the more successful coaching tree. And the reason why is he takes pride in it. He really tries to get his assistants ready to take that next step and to be successful head coaches. Whereas Bill just kind of keeps everything to himself. And I think a perfect example of this was Josh McDaniels. And when he got the Indianapolis job and he backed out of it, one of the reasons he backed out of it was Bill wanted him back, and Bill said, if you come back, we'll give you the keys to the kingdom. We'll open up everything to you. In other words, I'll tell you what I haven't been telling you. I'll teach you what I haven't been teaching you. He's always been a micromanager, and you're right. He knows what he wants, and he's probably the best coach ever. Coaches always talk about this. They pay lip service to maximizing strengths and minimizing the deficiencies as much as possible. He's the guy who looks at a player and says, "Oh, okay, he can do this, but he can't do this, so I'm not going to ask him to do what he can't do." I don't think there's ever been a better coach to utilize the strengths of his players than Bill Belichick.
There he is, Johnny Mack, and we're going to get into break in just a second. I'm going to put that on hold for a second because that fires automatically. But J Mack, dropping knowledge. That was a good change of pace, man. I was really getting, affected by the Carson Wentz saga. So
I sensed it in your mood. I wanted to shift around. I think we're all sick of Carson Wentz, but I like Carson personally. I hope he's doing well down in Texas.
You know what? I do as well, man. And I've been critical, but when it's all said and done, I'm going to wish him nothing but the best. And it's nothing but the best every night at 7:30 here with our insider, John McMullen. All right, John, I appreciate it. We'll do it one more time tomorrow.
All right, thanks, Ryan.
Thank you. There he is, Johnny Mack. All right, let's get into a break. Much more on the other side, including Jeff Parles. Stick around.